The Loch Ness is a huge expanse of water situated in the Northern Highlands of Scotland, located around 23 miles from Inverness. It's the second biggest loch in Scotland, with a surface area of 22 square miles, and due to its depth, it's the largest volume of water in the UK, and is an incredible 755 feet deep, 22.5 miles long, and between 1 and 1.5 miles wide. In fact, it holds more fresh water than all the lakes in England and Wales combined. The area surrounding the loch has been home to many interesting characters, including Aleister Crowley, the notorious occultist. To this day, rumours persist about black magic ceremonies and secret tunnels in the region. However, to most people, Loch Ness means only one thing: a monster. Let's take a look at the history and legacy of this fascinating mythical creature, and find out how much truth is behind one of the most legendary creatures in the world. As always, sit back and enjoy. Today's description and territory. The Loch Ness Monster, along with Bigfoot, is probably the world's most talked about mythical creature, especially in the United Kingdom. Those who claim to have seen the monster describe it almost exactly like a plesiosaur, an extinct animal that swam the waters millions of years ago, which we'll talk about later. The Loch Ness Monster is said to have a long, tapered neck, around 6 feet long, with a smallish head and round, fullish body. It's also described as having 4 paddle-like extremities, and in total is usually reported to be around 30 feet in length whenever it's been spotted in its Loch Ness home. But with that, the supposed monster's territory is no ordinary loch, and has a lot more history to it than just what may be lurking within it, which is essential to know about to learn more about the myth. The visibility beneath the water is no more than 4 inches, and this is due to the high density of peat particles found in the loch, and interestingly, it was discovered that there are 2 layers of radioactive sediment at the bottom, the first being the fallout from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. No matter how cold it gets in the area, the loch never freezes over due to a thermocline effect. This is when the top 100 meters of water cools before sinking and being replaced by warmer water from the depths. This is why on freezing cold days, the loch appears to be steaming. In 1952, John Cobb attempted the water speed record on Loch Ness. He successfully broke the record and became the first man to travel on water at over 200 miles an hour. But sadly, his speedboat Crusader lost control and disintegrated, killing him outright. There is a memorial on the edge of the loch to commemorate Cobb's achievement, which very little know about. That's just a bit of background to Nessie's home, but just how far back do sightings of this legend go? And how is one supposedly made-up creature generating 1 million visitors a year, and £22 million for the local economy? Where did it originate, and the earliest sightings? Some claim that sightings of a monster in the loch date back to AD 565, when according to legend, St. Columba turned away a giant beast that was threatening a man in the Ness River. And although it's likely this is just a myth, the seed was sown. In the modern era, which is when the monster was propelled into the public's eye, the phenomenon took off in 1933, when a man called George Spicer was driving with his wife along the loch. He alleged that an enormous, long-necked creature slowly crossed the road in front of his car. Some have dismissed this account as it's thought that he may have been intoxicated at the time. However, just a month later, a motorcyclist named Arthur Grant described exactly the same thing. The story became a media sensation, prompting newspapermen from London to descend on Loch Ness in search for the beast. A circus even offered a £20,000 reward to anyone who could capture the monster alive. After these first sightings, interest steadily increased, with more people coming forward with alleged sightings. But perhaps the most convincing at the time was in 1934, when Colonel Robert Wilson, a highly respected British surgeon, came forward with a photograph that appeared to show a sea serpent rising out of the loch. Wilson claimed he was driving along the northern shore of the loch when he noticed something moving in the water. He quickly stopped his car and took the famous shot. For decades, the public and the media were satisfied that this was the most convincing evidence that the Loch Ness Monster existed. Although tellingly, Wilson refused to be associated with the photo, and it became known as the surgeon's photograph. The photo created so much interest in the loch that visitors flooded the area in search of the monster. However, 50 years after the alleged sighting, Stuart Campbell analysed the photo and concluded it was no more than 2 or 3 feet long, possibly an otter or other similar creature. As it turned out, he was right about it not being a monster, but it wasn't any creature. It was exposed in 1994 that it was in truth a toy submarine with a serpent head attached. This was revealed in a deathbed confession by Christian Sperlin, who admitted his involvement in the plot. The plot also involved big game hunter Marmaduke Wetherill, and of course Wilson himself. Sperling said he was asked by his stepfather Marmaduke to make a convincing model that was then photographed floating in the Loch Ness. The photo was then given to Wilson, who served as a credible frontman. The hoax can clearly be seen in the original version of the image. However, the image given to the media was cropped to hide this viewpoint, making the model appear much larger than it actually was. Despite this revelation, it did nothing to dampen the enthusiasm of investigators and tourists, who to this day remain convinced the monster exists, regardless of the photo. But the question is, do they still have a reason to think that? The most believable encounters and evidence. To date, nobody has conclusively proved that Nessie exists, but that hasn't stopped amateur investigators and large-scale expeditions from searching tirelessly. And despite no firm evidence of a monster, there have been some unexplained things discovered. In the 1960s, several British universities began sonar expeditions to the lake, and although nothing conclusive was found, sonar operations did detect some unexplained large, moving underwater objects. In 1975, another team ventured into the loch, this time combining sonar and underwater photography, and they captured a photo that, after enhancement, appears to resemble the giant flipper of an aquatic animal. Many of the hundreds of photographs and video claiming to be Nessie have usually been exposed as elaborate hoaxes, or cases of mistaken identity, but there are a few that haven't been debunked yet, and deserve some review. In 2014, a satellite photo on the Apple Maps app appeared to show a 100-foot shape swimming in the loch. The image renewed interest in Nessie, with many hailing it as the proof they needed. However, others insisted it was just a boat and its wake. Another photo that caused a stir emerged in August 2016, when amateur photographer Ian Bramner released a photo he took from the banks of the loch. His friends claimed it showed 3 seals playing together, but Bremner believes that it could be Nessie. 2017 was also a great year for Nessie sightings, maybe because of the introduction of live feeds from the loch, meaning people from around the world can study its waters. This is exactly what American Diana Turner was doing when she was convinced she spotted the monster pop its head out of the water. She was so convinced that she reported the sighting to the official Loch Ness Monster Sightings Register. Another photo from 2017 was taken by Australian tourists Peter Jackson and Philippa Werner that seemed to show a dark figure in the loch. These are just a few of the sightings from recent years, and also one that was reported well before the invention of the internet. And if the Loch Ness Monster is just a myth, it's pretty impressive how long it's been going on for. What theories are there about the real Nessie? Let's look at some of the more logical theories about what the Loch Ness Monster could really be. Many of the sightings have been people mistaking large eels, catfish, otters, and other creatures or objects for Nessie. Also viewed from a distance, inanimate objects such as tree trunks, logs, or other debris can create the illusion of something much larger and more sinister looking. In 1991, Loch Ness Monster expert Steve Feltham gave up his job, home, and girlfriend to move to Scotland and live in a converted mobile library, parked overlooking Loch Ness. He was convinced that the waters held a family of prehistoric monsters. However, in 2015, after 24 years of watching the loch trying to catch a glimpse of the monster, He concluded that it was nothing more than a giant catfish, a species known to have been introduced to the loch by the Victorians. The Wells catfish is a giant that grows to lengths of 13 feet and weighs up to 62 stone. He believes what people have witnessed over the years fits the description of the catfish with its long curved back. Others have suggested that the monster's characteristics match that of a Greenland shark, which can survive in fresh water and can grow to a length of 20 feet. Another popular theory is that the monster is a plesiosaur, a giant long-necked reptile that went extinct millions of years ago that I mentioned earlier. The similarities to the Loch Ness Monster sightings is striking, meaning some have suggested that a few plesiosaurs still exist. As you will be aware, this is also the case with other cryptids, Bigfoot in particular, suggested to be a still-living Gigantopithecus. Others have thrown in that the monster could be a sturgeon, a fish that can grow to a large size and weigh several pounds. It also has a ridged back, typical of the description of Nessie sightings. In one of the most bizarre claims, it's been suggested that it could be some sort of alien craft, and that Loch Ness is an alien gateway to allow spaceships to travel through. This is supported by the unusually high number of UFO sightings around the Loch Ness. But again, since we have no solid proof if this monster exists, this leaves us with the last question. Is it real, or is it all just a myth? Here at Top 5s, we investigate and talk about a variety of creatures that may or may not exist, but the Loch Ness Monster is by far the most famous cryptid out there. A creature that has captured the world's imagination, and whose existence has been endorsed by many so-called witnesses since it came to prominence in the 1930s. Despite the lack of any credible scientific evidence, no one has ever come out and said with 100% certainty that the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist. So until they do, in many people's minds it does. So why do so many people across the world still believe that in the vast expanse of black water lives a huge monster or monsters? Well, the skeptic in us would say that the legend of the monster is so crucial to the Scottish tourist industry that despite the lack of evidence, it's their best interest to keep the myth alive. After all, without the Loch Ness, the hotels, restaurants and souvenir shops in the vicinity of Loch Ness would go out of business. Me and my girl have been to the Loch Ness, and I can confirm that despite all the evidence that this creature probably doesn't, or at least doesn't anymore exist, there is something about the Loch Ness. Having spent time there, I can tell you it's a stunning place, but also very mysterious and eerie at times. When looking out at the inky black water, it really is easy to believe that something lives there. And for that reason alone, I think people will continue to be divided for many more years on whether or not the Loch Ness Monster is in fact real. So that's 5 things you need to know about the Loch Ness Monster. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Mythical Creatures Case Files. Next week, we'll be delving into another fascinating mythical creature, the mermaid. But until then, don't forget to head over to the Top 5 store, and if you believe in the Loch Ness Monster, then pick up your I Believe beanie. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.